Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fast Pass, the history podcast in close to 30 minutes or less. As always, I'm Megan.
I'm Jason.
And I'm Trevor.
And today we're going to talk about a divisive man in history, Christopher Columbus. Quote, "The story of Christopher Columbus and his arrival in the Americas holds a pivotal place in an American foundational mythology that states that the discovery and the subsequent settlement and colonization of the New World in prophetic ways as an inevitable step forward in the course of human progression that eventually would lead to the founding of the USA and to U.S.-American westward expansion, its manifest destiny." End quote.
This kind of mythology has been taught to us as school children with the nursery rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's not how the rhythm went, but that's how the rhyme went. We learn really nothing more than the fact that he discovered the New World and the implication that that is why we have the United States right now. And neither of those things is inherently wrong. It's true that his expedition led us to the world that we have today. What we don't really teach in school is what he did on those islands that he discovered. We were only taught to see the big picture, and in this episode, let's focus on those details.
So first, let's talk a little bit about Columbus. There's very little information about Columbus and his early life. Scholars believe he was born in Genoa, Italy in 1451. There have also been some claims he was born in Portugal or Spain. Either way, he got a job on a merchant ship as a teen and kept that job until 1476 when pirates attacked his ship on the Portuguese coast, causing his boat to sink. He survived by floating on a scrap of wood, very Titanic-like, can I just say, and ended up in Lisbon, Portugal, where he studied math, astronomy, cartography, and navigation, which is where he got his idea that would eventually lead him to landing a ship in the Bahamas. Now, during this time, it was very difficult for Europeans to reach Asia by land, and by boat they had to sail all the way down past the Cape of Good Hope in Africa to get to Asia. But they'd only been sailing east. Columbus wanted to sail west. He tried to get Portugal or England to finance him, but they refused. So in 1492, he asked Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, and they said yes. His contract stated that he'd keep 10% of whatever riches he found, a noble title, and governorship of lands that he encountered. And then comes the nursery rhyme, and he sailed on August 3rd of 1492, and October 11th he made landfall.
Now, I would like to break down the myth of discovery for a moment. Columbus didn't discover the Americas. He wasn't even the first European who made their way to the Americas. Leif Erikson was 400 years before Columbus. And yet, not even Erikson discovered the Americas, because it was not an uninhabited piece of land. The Americas were filled with people who had crossed over from Asia when the land bridge formed from Asia to Alaska 35,700 years ago. They were the people who discovered the Americas, not the Europeans. Civilization already existed and thrived in the Americas at the time of Columbus's arrival. So he discovered nothing. He accidentally stumbled upon the Americas when he was trying to find a trade route to Asia.
Now, Columbus's original logs are lost to time, and the copy that Queen Isabella requested be made of them is also lost to time. The only documentation we have of this is from Bartolomé de las Casas. He wrote an abstract of the copy in the 1530s. According to these logs, which are readily available and anyone can read them, they spotted land, an island of the Bahamas, on October 11th, and he promptly, quote, took possession of that island for the king and queen, end quote. Columbus then met the indigenous people, the Taino, who were a peaceful, matriarchal society who settled disputes via ball games rather than war. He described them, quote, "They seemed on the whole to me to be very poor people, all of whom I saw were young, not above 30 years of age, well made, with fine shapes and faces, their hair short and coarse like that of a horse's tail, combed toward the forehead, except a small portion which they suffer to hang down behind, and never cut. Weapons they have none, nor are acquainted with them, for I showed them swords which they grasped by the blades and cut themselves through ignorance. They have no iron, their javelins being without it, and nothing more than sticks, though some have fish bones or other things at the ends. They are all of a good size and stature and handsomely formed," end quote. And then literally not even 2 sentences later followed it up with, quote, "It appears to me that the people are ingenious and would be good servants," end quote.
It's just crazy how he's describing these human beings as almost animal stock or show ponies, commenting on their coarse hair and well-built bodies. It's honestly probably just foreshadowing of how he treated them later. And that same log entry talks about kidnapping and taking 6 of them back to Spain to please the queen, saying, quote, "There be good servants, and I am of the opinion that they would very readily become Christian, as they appear to have no religion," end quote. They did, in fact, have a religion. A later log on October 14th said, quote, "I could conquer the whole of them with 50 men and govern them as I please," end quote. And that's exactly what he did. For the next 5 months, he sailed around to other islands, mainly Cuba and present-day Haiti Dominican Republic, but found very few riches. Columbus went back to Spain in 1493, leaving 39 of his men behind in, quote, Hispaniola, or present-day Haiti Dominican Republic, to build a settlement called La Navidad. As mentioned in his log, he did kidnap Taino around 10 to 25 to bring with him back to Spain, but only 8 survived the voyage. Can we get a murder count going? This will last anywhere from 2 to 17. He also brought back with him birds and plants that he discussed in his logs.
So Columbus arrived back to Spain on March 15th, 1493. He wrote to Ferdinand and Queen Isabella about his discoveries, which he wrote in Spanish, but then sent it to Rome to have it reprinted in Latin. And in my research, I actually found a copy of the pamphlet in Latin, which I don't speak. However, and thankfully, someone translated it and put it online. The internet and Google are wonderful things. Quote, "On the 33rd day after leaving Cadiz, I came into the Indian Sea, where I discovered many islands inhabited by numerous people. I took possession of all of them for our most fortunate king by making public proclamation and unfurling his standard, no one making any resistance," end quote. It is interesting thinking about marketing or fashioning oneself, how Columbus describes in this pamphlet letter thing his interactions with the Taino. Quote, "They do not practice idolatry. On the contrary, they believe that all strength, all power, in short, all blessings are from heaven, and I've come down from there with these ships and sailors," end quote. I don't know what it is about early conquistadors wanting to frame themselves as gods in the eyes of the indigenous people, but they did not see them that way. Columbus even doubles down on it 2 paragraphs later, saying, quote, "They are coming now with me and have always believed that I have come from heaven," end quote. Give it a rest, bro. He, again, here mentions how weak and timid and helpless these people are. It's literally the setup for colonialism. These people are poor, stupid, and can't defend themselves. But if we conquer them, we can save them and civilize them.
Now we need to talk about his genocide of indigenous people, which really happened on his second voyage back in 1493, the invasion. Columbus sailed back with 17 ships filled with more than 1,000 men, including cavalrymen and attack dogs known as man-eating dogs. And yes, while it is true that more indigenous people died of disease than his cruelty, that does not excuse his part in it. He instituted a law of tribute in which Columbus demanded that anyone over the age of 14 was to fill a, quote, hawk's bell full of gold every 6 months. If they didn't succeed, they were severely punished, up to and including having their hands cut off and therefore bleeding to death. Bartolome de las Casas, who was on the voyage and witnessed this, wrote, quote, "Others and all those that they desired to let live, they would cut off both their hands, but leave them hanging by the skin, and they would say to them, 'Go and take these letters,' which was to say, 'Carry the news to the people who have hidden themselves in the mountains and the wilderness,'" end quote. Because, of course, the Taino were also not given access to cultural medicines and adequate food and water, which only exacerbated the deaths by wounds and diseases. If you can't properly treat an illness, it will kill you.
Now, I do need to note that the indigenous people did not just give up. They were always fighting. One tribe killed the people Columbus left behind in La Navidad and destroyed the fort they built. They resisted in all the ways they could. Unfortunately, Columbus had too many men and his weaponry to advance. He burned people alive, raped women. During one fight, he rounded up 600 to 700 people and knifed them to death. Then he ordered the bodies be dragged to the plaza next door. He hung and burned the chief, a woman as they were a matriarchal society, 300 nobles, and, quote, countless numbers of common people. This was their reality. Get taken as slaves and either be worked to death or tortured to death or mass murdered. Sometimes Columbus and his men fed their babies to those man-eating dogs. They put Tainos on spikes, burned them alive, they roasted them on spits. The most horrible things you could think of, they did. Bartolome de las Casas recounted, quote, as they saw themselves each day perish by the cruel and inhuman treatment of the Spaniards, crushed to earth by those horses, cut to pieces by swords, eaten and torn by dogs, many buried alive and suffering all kinds of exquisite tortures, many surrendered to their fate, while the survivors fled to the mountains to starve.
The tribute system broke down a year later because on top of the genocide, disease was running rampant and killing so many indigenous people that they were running short on slave labor from the Taino. So he instituted the encomienda system, which would be used in South and Central America too when the conquistadors landed there, which gave Spaniards land that belonged to the Taino and essentially enslaved those Taino on that land to the Spaniards. Obviously, when this started happening, the Taino tried to run away and the Spaniards killed them. Then we have to talk about how he started the transatlantic slave trade. Now, when Columbus used to sail for Portugal, he dabbled in some slave trading, and when the search for gold turned up nothing, he decided, well, you know what I can send back to the Spaniards that will have value? Slaves. He kidnapped 550 Taino, took them to Spain, and auctioned them off in Seville, which was the capital at the time.
His reign of the island was so bad that word got back to the king and queen, who sent a royal commissioner to arrest Columbus. In 1500, he was arrested, leaving the colony to his son, and he returned to Spain in chains for his tyranny and cruelty of the native people. However, even though he went to jail, he was stripped of his governorship, King Ferdinand financed a fourth journey for him to go back.
Now is probably a good time to mention the flip-flopping nature of the king and queen of Spain on the topic of indigenous rights. In 1495, Columbus captured a shipload of indigenous people who were from the tribe that killed his people and destroyed his fort at La Navidad, and sent them back to Spain to be slaves. However, the crown freed them and sent them back to Hispaniola because the queen saw them as her subjects, not slaves. They then changed this in 1504 when Isabella said if the indigenous people were acting up, that they should be sold into slavery. When she died in 1504, she went back on her own statements and called for fair treatment, but it was a little too late.
When Dominican missionaries came to the island in 1510, they were appalled by what they saw, delivering a sermon to those Christians, Columbus and his son Diego, who would commit such atrocities. Quote, "This voice says that you are in mortal sin, that you live and die in it, for the cruelty and tyranny you use in dealing with these innocent people. Tell me, by what right or justice do you keep these Indians in such cruel and horrible servitude? On what authority have you waged a detestable war against these people who dwelt quietly and peacefully on their own land? Why do you keep them so oppressed and weary, not giving them enough to eat, nor taking care of them in their illness? For what the excessive work you demand of them, they fall ill and die, or rather you kill them with your desire to extract and acquire gold every day. And what care do you take that they should be instructed in religion? Are these not men? Have they not rational souls? Are you not bound to love them as you love yourselves?" End quote. Columbus's son Diego was not happy about this sermon and told the missionary who delivered the sermon, Montesinos, to take it back. Montesinos decided to double down the next Sunday and with another banger sermon exposing those cruelties. News of this found its way back to Spain, and Montesinos went to Spain and reported the atrocities to King Ferdinand, who sent a commission to investigate the charges of cruelty. That commission recommended that the indigenous people, quote, should be treated as free citizens, end quote. But they also said you can still enslave them, just with better working conditions, which nobody enforced. De las Casas wrote the commission's recommendation of continued servitude without the elimination of prevalent, quote, despotic conditions, quote, led inevitably to the extermination of the Indians, end quote. And indeed, in 1514, over 90% of the indigenous people had died in just 22 years. After 1592, the Aboriginal indigenous Taino were considered extinct. Aboriginal here meaning those who were there before Columbus came, and does not count the population of people who were born from Spanish involvement.
And this method of conquest would continue with Cuba, which Bartolome wrote about those genocidal massacres as well, and Mexico, Peru, and the rest of the New World.
So the next time you look at a statue of him or see his name on your calendar, or you think of that little nursery rhyme, just remember that's a very, very, very small part of his story.
And the rest is history. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you want sources, they are listed in the description box. And make sure to catch us next week at the After the Pod, where we talk about what we just learned today.
Bye-bye.